Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Okay, let's dive right into some recent developments surrounding the situation in Ukraine. We're going to cover a few key things today.
Sounds good. Lots moving parts lately.
Yeah, exactly. So first, what the Russian foreign minister has been saying about Germany. Then, Russia's proposal for another round of talks with Ukraine. And finally, some comments from the U.S. President Trump about figuring out Russia's intentions.
Okay, quite a bit to unpack there. Where should we start with Germany?
Let's start there. So around May 25th, the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, made some comments. He talked about maybe removing range limits on weapons for Ukraine.
Right, I remember that. And financing joint weapons production, too.
Exactly, and boosting military aid overall. Though, he did clarify later.
What was the clarification?
He specified he meant financing production within Ukraine, missiles of any range produced there, not necessarily Germany supplying long-range missiles directly.
Okay. That's still a pretty significant potential shift, financing production like that.
It definitely got a reaction. On May 28th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov weighed in.
And what was his take?
He was quite blunt. Said Germany's getting drawn directly into the conflict. He expressed hope that responsible politicians would stop what he termed madness.
Madness. That's strong language. It does echo some historical anxieties, perhaps.
He also brought up reports about German tanks, Leopard tanks specifically.
Oh, yeah. What about them?
Said they were apparently destroyed in Russia's Kursk region. This was supposedly after a Ukrainian incursion back in August 2024. Russia had reported liberating that area on April 26th.
So linking German hardware directly to fighting inside what Russia considers its territory now.
Precisely. Then came this quite stark historical comparison.
Let me guess, the 20th century.
You got it. Lavrov said Germany was sliding down the same slippery slope as back then, which led to its collapse, warned them to draw the correct conclusion.
Wow, that's dialing up the rhetoric significantly, invoking historical collapse.
And he repeated Russia's usual line that Western aid just prolongs things, doesn't change the outcome. The Kremlin apparently saw Merz's comments as provoking war.
Right, framing external support as the main issue, which I suppose leads us to the negotiation track.
It does. Russia has proposed a second round of negotiations with Ukraine. They want to hold it in Istanbul on June 2nd.
Istanbul again. Turkey seems keen to keep playing that facilitator role.
Seems so. And Russia says it's prepared a memorandum. It outlines their conditions for a peaceful settlement.
Conditions based on addressing the root causes, I think I read.
That's what they've indicated, yeah. Detailing their position on the root causes of the crisis. They're ready to present it there.
Any idea what those root causes might entail from their perspective? Likely broad security concerns, NATO expansion, that sort of thing.
Probably safe to assume those are part of it. The Russian delegation, led by V.R. Medinsky, is said to explain the memo, and they thank Turkey for hosting again.
Okay, so a proposal on the table for June 2nd.
And it follows the first direct talks they had in 3 years, which were also in Istanbul, back on May 16th. That was initiated by Russian President Putin.
Right, and those talks did yield something concrete, didn't they? The prisoner exchange.
They did. Agreements on that exchange, reportedly 1,000 for 1,000, presenting ceasefire plans, and a preliminary agreement to meet again, which is presumably this June 2nd meeting.
And that big prisoner swap actually happened.
It did, between May 23rd and 25th, military personnel and civilians. Described as the largest exchange since hostilities began in 2022.
That's significant. Even if it's just one area, it shows some level of, well, functional communication is possible.
True. Meanwhile, on Kyiv's side, they reportedly sent their own draft memorandum to Washington on May 27th.
Okay, so Kyiv has its own set of conditions. What are they saying?
Their conditions apparently include an unconditional ceasefire first, to allow for talks on the next stages. But crucially, they consider legal recognition of Crimea, the DNR, LNR, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions as part of Russia to be unacceptable.
And there's the core issue again, the territorial integrity question. That's always going to be incredibly difficult. DNR and LNR being the self-proclaimed republics, of course.
Of course. Then, just yesterday, May 28th, Russian President Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said the Russian memorandum was almost finished. Didn't reveal the terms, though.
Still holding their cards close, then.
Yeah. And Maria Zakharova from the Foreign Ministry said the memo would outline settlement principles and timelines for a potential peace agreement.
Principles and timelines. Still vague, but suggests a framework.
Okay, so that brings us to the U.S. perspective. U.S. President Trump also commented on May 28th.
Right. What did he say?
He said he believes the situation regarding a peaceful settlement will become clear within about 2 weeks.
2 weeks? That seems optimistic, given the complexities we've just discussed.
He did qualify it slightly, said he can't currently say if Russia wants to resolve the conflict, but he expects to know in, approximately 2 weeks.
So a 2-week window to gauge Moscow's intent, in his view.
And he added that if Moscow doesn't want to end the conflict, Washington will act a little differently.
A little differently. Wonder what that implies. More pressure, less engagement. Hard to say.
Hard to say. He also praised his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, saying he's doing a phenomenal job on settlement efforts. But, he also noted nothing's certain until an agreement is actually signed.
That's fair enough. The gap between talks and a signed deal can be huge.
And U.S. President Trump also mentioned he's ready to hold a trilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky and Russian President Putin if it's needed.
A leaders' summit. That would be a major development if it ever came together.
It's worth remembering, resolving this was a big campaign promise for U.S. President Trump. He initially suggested much faster timelines, like 24 hours, though that was revised.
Right, the 24-hour claim.
Since returning to office, the U.S. has reportedly held meetings with people from Moscow and Kyiv. U.S. President Trump had previously floated the idea of stepping back from mediation if things got too difficult.
And there were some reports suggesting the U.S. had kind of stepped back a bit recently after he said in late April to check back in 2 weeks on a potential deal.
Yeah, there were suggestions of that. So the U.S. role seems somewhat fluid, but connecting back, those May 16th Istanbul talks did lead to the prisoner exchange and setting up conditions for a ceasefire. And now Moscow's proposed this June 2nd meeting.
So yeah, a lot of diplomatic maneuvering, strong words towards Germany, a proposed next step in talks via Turkey, and the U.S. watching closely, setting its own kind of deadline for clarity. It's definitely a situation to keep watching.
Absolutely. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.